Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. Today we are joined by Dannah Vaughan, who is a global customer success leader and the founder and host of the Rebels of SaaS podcast. How are you today?
Doing awesome. How are you? Pumped to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No, it's awesome to have you with us. We always like to start with a brief introduction so our listeners can learn a little bit about you. Who are you and what are you known for and how have you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so how I got to where I'm at today, honestly, was 100% mistake, right? And I always like to open that way. I was a customer experience leader in, the largest networking and telephony company in the world. Had a team of project managers, engineers, fiber optic technicians of all things, and was just really sort of involved in the implementation and the delivery of that customer experience. And that was fantastic. But then I had a child, a wonderful baby child who was just this fantastic. She still is. She's a dragon and I love her. But I said to myself, I want to do something different. And so my silly self said, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this random title called a customer success manager. And I'm going to actually have more of a family life and be able to focus on my family. And I went to work in a closet office. I always like to joke. It was honestly a closet that, this startup tech company had as a customer success manager. And I worked harder than I ever did, and longer than I ever did, and realized I was a junkie for customer success. And so I married that, right, through the evolution of my career with leadership. Keep in mind, my formal education is I went and got a master's degree in public administration. So quantum statistics, physics, these things that have absolutely nothing to do with, with the actual fundamental customer experience or SaaS or any of that fun stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And, over time, I just, and I've been very blessed to have some great teams that have delivered some fantastic things, 30% plus revenue growth, 7 to 10 points NRR improvements. I mean, just some massive, really, really cool things. And so, with that came a very quick trajectory in my career. And, lastly, my role was actually VP of a global SaaS organization. Um, Fantastic. And then lately I have been, I actually decided to start a podcast. And when I started this podcast, it actually came out of the fundamental discoveries that happen when, like so many of us in tech, we've all been, several of us have enjoyed layoff, not really in the past 12 months. But out of that came, the need to take I like to say, a brain break. And I wanted to take a brain break and reset so that when I was, mentoring in global mentor groups, when I was having conversation and coaching teams, the next team that I served, I wanted to be sure I could say, with humility and truth, this is, layoffs suck, but there's another side to that. And so I took the brain break. I started the podcast. And, now it's in 6 countries. People like the conversation. It's all about positive disruption in SaaS. So I also really like to bake bread. They're blurred out, but there's some vintage cookbooks back here. That makes me a happy Dannah. And people mispronounce my name, Dannah, Diana, or Donna, and that's fine because it gives me something super cool to talk to people about.
That's awesome. Great intro. Do you want to plug your podcast quickly, Dannah, where we can find you?
Yeah, so Rebels of SaaS podcast is on Spotify, right? Of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find the weekly installments there. But we bring people on across the different departments in SaaS, and we talk about ways to move the needle, positive disruption towards revenue generation and retention. And it's just conversations about, how to bring smart people with big ideas, a voice.
Yeah. So it's like very topical for us as well. We'd like to have this conversation with yourself, if you don't mind. You mentioned the layoffs, and you mentioned the amount of people having been let go, basically. What do you think the root cause is? What caused all that mess?
Man. So I think it's a couple of things, right? I think ultimately there's two things systemically. Obviously, there's macroeconomic things that have certainly played, and that's at the global scale. Um, we have unrest all over the world. I won't delve into that, but I will say that, there's all sorts of fun political things that are happening, and people are dealing with hard things globally. And when that happens, I think it really compresses the whole economy. So there's that. The other thing is, we had this sort of flowing faucet of funding in SaaS for such a long, I think really such a long time, the last 2 to 5 years. And now, when I say now, I mean in the last 12 to 36 months, what we've seen is a lot of the leaders, um, that have had to make certain decisions. Quite frankly, there's such things as really bad leaders, right? There's great leaders and there's bad leaders, just like everything else. And so it could be that in some situations, leaders made some poor decisions, and those things have led to needing to have cost compression and FTE reduction and all that fun stuff, right? Um, I don't know. I think it's a mix of both of that, and then also just um, the overwhelming need to evolve and do better business, right? There's always, I think I like to always bring up the example that there's sharks that can jump out of the water and find their food in the air. Like they can do 360 turns. They've evolved to be able to do that to eat. I think SaaS is kind of in that world right now. Like we have to figure out, you know, how to do that kind of leap and jump and twist, or, because that's how survivability really looks, in the coming 24 months. That's what I think. What do you think?
I think there was the wrong focus on the wrong metrics, and there was
Mm.
popularity around the wrong type of growth as well. I don't know if you've been on LinkedIn over the last 3 or 4 days. It's all about
Mm.
changing the business model from user license to consumption, a consumption-based business model. And I think you go through trends like this, and you end up with seasons where, yeah, the popular metric is growth rate. Doesn't really matter about the retention, doesn't really matter about the cost per acquisition and all of that, unit economics and all of this. And then 6 months later or 6 years later, you're in a position where everything collapsed because retentions are going down the drain. Products getting commoditized means that you've got way more competition, and the price just like race to the bottom. Um, what do you think the valuations are, or the VCs um, are now putting in front? Like what's the metric that is the most important for VCs at the moment?
Mm.
What gives you a good
I think,
multiplier? Yeah.
I do think that retention is something that, certainly is kind of the flavor of the day. And it's interesting because, I think in SaaS, what we found was a lot of reduction around the customer success world in the last, 16 months, right? Because that customer success team maybe doesn't do anything in some eyes, when it comes to leadership.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, like you said, now that we have retention, I think that there's a lot of people talking about it. And, the people that aren't, right, are unfortunately the ones that, in my true opinion, will learn customer success is value the hard way, so to speak. Retention is the way to revenue. And I feel very passionate about, going and grabbing new logos is fantastic. And I think that in certain business models, it makes sense to prioritize that. That I will not disagree with, but I would posit that in many organizations, being able to predict client behavior with assuredness is, certainly just as valuable, and being able to retain them as customers while nurturing a relationship with them where, you're driving value, and that value is selling for you, and then, hey, also selling for your sales team. You know, if customer success isn't being leveraged right, your sales team is your sales team's working too hard, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen like a collective shift across the landscape where there's now a focus on, hey, actually, let's push the doors, which are slightly open already. We have a foot in this account. So if we're trying to grow our bottom line numbers, actually, let's try to focus over there because that's the easiest money as opposed to going and capturing new logo. So I agree 100% with what you said. I think where some companies are struggling is how you then structure the team around that. You know, where should the responsibilities lie? Who does what role as part of that? Because yeah, you know, there's two parts of it, right? One is we want to retain this customer. We need to make sure that we're hitting all the objectives, helping them achieve their goals, whatever it is they need to. But then on the flip side of it is, hey, actually, we need to grow this account because we need more money as a company. So how do you divide that responsibility and who does it sit with?
Yeah, so quite frankly, it's a partnership between sales and customer success, and that sounds a lot easier than what I've found it to be in practice, right? Because what I see, and I'm sure you're familiar with this too, the both of you, what happens is there becomes this very healthy, I like to say, competition and animosity, right, between the customer success person, especially at the enterprise level, says, hey, I don't want this salesperson coming into my account, right? Because if they do, then they're going to mess up the relationship, and the renewal was during X date, and I don't want to mess this up. And then from the sales side says, well, that customer success manager is just a boring customer success manager. They don't have enough polish for my customer. This is a CFO, for Christ's sake. Why are they even wanting to be at the table with me in this conversation? So what I think has to happen, right, is there has to be a confidence and a polish in customer success, right? Customer success has to step up to that level and that polish that sales is expecting, and they have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Over time, as renewals happen and sales happen, this natural trust starts to happen. But until that trust happens, there needs to be a very close alignment, and that needs to happen before business reviews, after business reviews. They need to be joined at the hip to have conversations. The salesperson and the CSM actually come up with the business review deck, if you have a deck. And honestly, sometimes decks are crap. I'm going to be real about it. You know, if you're talking to a CFO, okay, sure, build a short deck. But I don't want to talk to you in a business review. What I want to do is to listen and figure out, what job is my product doing for you? Okay, cool. How are we going to track that over the next quarter together? And then it's rinse, repeat. And then also, hey, this is my sales guy or girl. I like to say something funny, like, hey, it's my partner in crime. But they recognize that it's not just Dannah, it's Dannah and Joe. Joe is my hypothetical salesperson over here today, by the way, guys. But you know, it's a pair of us, right? And we present as a pair. And in every business review, there's a conversation about what trends are happening in the industry today that could be enticing to the customer. It's not through the lens of, oh, hey, by the way, this is my sales guy. He's going to tell you about new products, right? That's 5 years ago customer success. We don't want to do that anymore. What we want to say is, hey, look, you know, there's these great AI trends, and we're noticing, you know, some fantastic ROI around this from the industry at the macro level. You know, Joe's got some metrics here. He's going to talk about some benchmarks, and we're going to see how that works, and maybe talk about some alignment and opportunity together as partners. And that's really kind of how that works. There's also great value in doing a RACI matrix and actually defining in the scope of work in the SOW as you scale, right? Who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed inside of all of these different tactical items that sales and customer success does. Then nobody's surprised, right? When the stove gets hot, nobody's surprised in reaching together for the pot. Yeah. Because people know, you know, that the customer success manager sets the meeting and sends the invitation typically. Now, obviously, you know, these prescriptions, there's going to be abnormalities, but because there's this close marriage, you know, leadership is pushing sales and CSM together. They're talking about this stuff. You know, the sales guy's picking up the phone and saying, hey, by the way, you know, Dannah, I need to set this one up. And, you know, there takes a little bit of humility, a little bit of vulnerability. But you got to have people on your team from a CSM lens that are willing to take that leap of faith, to have that coaching and have adaptability and flexibility in, trusting the sales relationship, because for it to work right, the sales and CS relationship has to be right. And it just happens by the doing of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like fully agree once again with everything you've said there. I think one of the things or another area which companies can struggle with, because I think at a top level, at least, most companies would realize that, hey, we need these guys to work better together. And the way they try to do that then is through things like compensation plans. Comp plans are put in place to drive specific behaviors to achieve a specific outcome. And so where they may struggle is, all right, so what does that comp plan need to look like to ensure that A, it's not just the sales guy who's getting all the glory, and B, then, if that is the case, which, I've seen happen quite a few times, then on the CS side, you start to build a little bit of resentment there, because it's like, hey, I've done all the work this year, right? I mean, let's be honest, most of the work, the business as usual stuff is done by me. And all of a sudden, Joe over here, he's going to come and collect a fat paycheck off the back of that.
Totally agree. I think, but that's why I totally support the incentivizing, right, of leads, not just leads, but, true CSQLs that have, those types of revenue benefits, right? So, sales is going to get commission. Okay, cool. But at the end of the day, it may make sense for a customer success manager to be, paid certainly on the scale of NRR, which has, the certain amount of closed books inside of their total holistic TCV. But the other thing to play with is maybe it makes sense for us to not just hold customer success managers accountable, that not so sexy word, but we still have to talk through that lens, right? Because it's what we do. But, maybe we need to say, okay, we're going to incentivize them based on X amount of productive leads. Because they're right. They are working to get that ball down court. And they need to have some kind of monetary pay, some kind of a tie back and reward back for that. I think, it also matters around the team and what motivates the team that one is leading as well. I think it kind of goes back to Hertzberg theory of motivation, right? And if it's these higher level motivators that are motivating this particular team, maybe it's something different. I personally I'm a money girl. I like money. So that's what motivates me, right? So for me, I would love the structure. If I'm a very highly functioning IC and I've got a great salesperson, and that kind of enforces that thing too that we're talking about, because then the customer success manager is trusting the salesperson to close. Salesperson closes, they both get paid on something. One's more in a bonus structure, one's more in commission. Okay, fine. But I like where you're going with it, and it is kind of a classic issue for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dannah, I want you to ask, because you've got experience in like both customer success, but also kind of operationalizing the whole organization, like through and through. What do you think? I always wonder, at the moment, we see a lot of content on LinkedIn about your first hire should be someone in operations, and then you should be focusing on putting your operation mechanisms in place before you then staff the team. And then we're in a position at Jointflows where we're getting started, we're like year one plus. I don't think realistically we would be in a position where it would make more sense to hire someone in RevOps over someone in sales or over someone in customer success, for instance. So what do you think comes first? Do you think you need to have the staff in the right departments first so that you understand where the operational needs are, or you need to put the operational mechanisms in place so that you can then staff your organization? And you might be not as binary as that. I appreciate it, but like this seems to be the two.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Mick, because it's one that we've been talking about internally.
I struggle to phrase it.
So this is what I think. I think that SaaS is built on people. This is what I think. I think whether it's relationships, how you navigate them, people make buying decisions typically based on what job the product's doing for them, and the people that they're familiar with in the organization. People make most hires, let's be honest, based on network, who they know, right?
Yeah.
It all goes back fundamentally to people. And I think that if you have the right people from a flexibility standpoint with good, solid ability to work hard, learn, and they have that entrepreneurial spirit, that can come. And then the process is something they build, because you have to have builders for process. The machine, I love all the great things, all the great, CRMs. I could sit here and tell you about like why I prefer certain customer success automation platforms versus others. But, ultimately people, right, are going to be able to really, truly be able to say, okay, this is where I've stuck my toe in the dark before doing this. Or, hey, I'm really passionate about this. Let me make a business case for why, and then drive that home. Versus, and then they're the ones, I'm really big on micro efficiency. It was coached to me through one of the leaders that I had earlier in my customer success career.
Yeah.
And I do think that, collaborative leadership and building that out, you'll hear me say racy matrix 20 times, but it's because if you really truly do the work of, okay, this is what we want to build, this is what the roles of the people during the different goals are, then we have a roadmap. Let's go build it and bring the processes, vendors in, and all that. Now, the tools have to be there, and they have to be the right tools to be able to scale, period.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate about that. But I will say that, it's just people first. Now, which one's more important? I'm gonna be real with you. Customer success, even with, I'll say, kind of the hit, I've heard podcasts on LinkedIn and different things about how customer success was under attack in 2023. I believe that to a certain extent, but I wasn't very nervous about it, and I'll tell you why. Because fundamentally, success, retention, and the fiscal modality that is SaaS, right, goes hand in hand with customer success. So I was confident that the oscillation of success would come back around. Maybe it looks different. Okay, cool. Yeah. But all of that being said, right, I think that customer success has to have sales and has to have ops, and everybody has to work together and have some really damn hard conversations. And if you're willing to look at someone and have the hard conversations, then really cool stuff happens. And then the processes and the tools come in. And I mean, then you start to really see the great things, like the huge rev wins and products that people, talk about and read about on LinkedIn every day. Those kinds of things. That's what I think.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's how I see it as well. And in fact, we've just hired a fractional VP of customers today. Just that's our yeah, cool. That's our first that's our first hire outside of the funding team. So yeah, feels like we're in line. I've got another very binary question. Sorry, I'm a bit black or white. Eventually you grow and you reach a certain level of operations, you see, like, you become predictable, you've industrialized your go-to-market and your revenue. What's the best setup for success? Is it RevOps managing sales and revenue, or is it revenue managing RevOps and operations?
Okay, I think it's the former.
RevOps managing. Why do you think that?
Honestly, because I've done it both ways, and I think that the former just works, and the second one is just really, really messy.
From experience, you're speaking from experience. Yeah. I see a lot of, again, like contradictory views kind of and setups and like that. I don't think there's a right and wrong. I think it's really about who does what and how much involvement is then yeah in the picture.
And it all goes back to what's best for the business at that given moment and the people in the business too. And, you know, what and how they want to build it. Because I do think there's freedom and flexibility a little bit, right? It's, you know, that's the cool thing about what we're doing, you know, when we're building. You know, it can look, you know, at least, you know, as you put it binary, it can look these two ways. It can look, you know, probably other ways, of course. But the really cool thing about it is the freedom in that formality, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. One of the other things that I know we spoke about before we hit the record button is something that you're passionate about talking is also diversity and inclusion as well. Talk a little bit about that. Where does your passion stem from and what does good look like?
Yeah. So, you know, I am a big advocate for all groups of people, you know, globally. I want to bring voice to any and everyone, you know, and that's regardless of, you know, all of the things that, you know, in business we sometimes don't chat about, you know, sex, gender, religion, representation, all these things, right? But I can say, you know, what does good look like? Good, in my opinion, is when you can say that you have an even mix of executives on your, you know, leadership teams that have equal representation, right? And I think that I'm a big fan of employee resource groups. You know, I was able to work with an awesome team of people and bring a global ERG organization to my past business, and within my past role of service. And you know, I worked with their legal team. We created a scope and a charter for that, pitched it to the executive board. Of course, I was part of that team, but and served as one of the executive sponsors. It was fantastic, right? And I think that big moves like that, which certainly I was just one voice as one of the leaders, but you know, making big moves like that to SaaS is important so that, you know, people have, you know, voice inside of SaaS. You know, particularly and selfishly, I'll admit that I'm a huge advocate for women. You know, because we're coached so often, you know, sit at the side of the executive table. You know, I had a great female leader on, you know, who shared that, you know, she was coached never to sit at the front of the table, you know, at the actual head of the table, just because of, you know, different subconscious things over the years that, you know, we've all been conditioned to think and feel. But I think that the biggest thing is, you know, making active efforts in your organization, creating some ERG groups that do positive things, right, that are productive, because, you know, disruption survives because it's doing good, not because it's, you know, being distraction or doing things that are counterintuitive to making profit. And, you know, but when people are motivated and happy and they feel they have voice and community and a repository of things to grow in their career, like an ERG does, you know, they are more productive. And those types of things are just really empowering to consider.
Can you sorry, I know you've got a question, but just for the audience, like can you unpack a little bit about what ERG means and how it's structured? I feel like is very enterprise in terms of, you know, the size of the companies who have this kind of structure.
Oh, yeah. So an employee resource group, really. So as a company grows, you know, and becomes a larger organization, you know, it's just really beneficial to create these groups where, you know, persons of like factions, whatever that may be, whether it's a group of women, or a group of African American or a group of Middle Eastern persons, or a group of LGBTQIA, you know, it's just a way, right, for people to have structured community. And it's great inside of virtual environments, particularly because we can't have that, community softball or soccer league in virtual land now that we're working remotely across oceans. So we still need to feel that fundamental need to feel human connection. We learned that during pandemic, right? So many tragedies where people lost their lives from being isolated. And that human connectedness matters. And that's something that's really cool about this employee resource group. It does need to be very carefully navigated with your legal and HR team, just because, of course, you want that, everyone to benefit from it mutually and for it to have a charter and an SOW like everything else that we do in business. Yeah. But, it's exciting and an opportunity to, again, have community and career growth resources.
Yeah, you mentioned that, as long as when they're doing things and putting things together is for the good. Give some examples of what they can do that's good. Like how do you drive that sense of community and accomplishment? So one thing that's really great, for example, is something as simple as creating a logo. So they all have this thing that they have together as combined symbolism. Humans connect really big with symbolism, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad. If we look through history, right, I can name a few bad symbols that I want. But all of that being said, that sort of rallying under a symbol is really cool. And then the other thing is, I mentioned career materials and repository. It's something outside of the book club because I can't stand the book club, thing, so to speak. I think it's great, right? But have a thematic thing where you're doing like, mock interview conversations, for example, or something that's topical around whatever it is you're doing. If you're solving pharmaceutical issues in a part of the world, talk about that as a group and, those types of things and dissect that. It's a way to really challenge the brain. Or, there's all of these great personality tests that sort of help the individual person be able to understand, hey, this is what I'm good at and this is where I can improve. And then the whole group can talk about that as they want collaboratively and figure out where all the puzzle pieces kind of get together and make sense. So stuff like that. And then, I do think that it's important to talk about, and bring into the conversation different, different thought leaders that are applicable to the group. So, for example, I'm a big one. This same leader turned me on to Extreme Ownership by Jocko Williams. I'm really big on extreme ownership. I think it's super important in SaaS. And, having and bringing in, summaries, videos, clips, and digital resources around that, reading pieces of that as it makes sense. I'm not going to ask anybody to read a whole book. But those types of things, I think is where the magic is. Yeah. And one more question on this topic from me. I know you spoke about obviously being a big advocate for women within this kind of scope as well. And one of the things that is rather noticeable to me, at least, the more and more I connect with people who are in exec teams and C-level suites is the way it's majority male. It's what I come across, at least. What do you think we can do to change that to align with this?
So I think it's two things. I think the first thing is, I think that women have to, be diplomatic in the way that they present themselves and continue to grow and put themselves out there in confidence and to do hard things and not be afraid of them. We have to, I know I know someone that I was chatting with about imposter syndrome. That's a real thing. And I think that we have to put out of our heads that, we don't belong at these tables because we do, right? And the other thing that's even more important than that is I encourage the male leaders that see that, right, to make active efforts to really change that, even if it's hard, maybe if it's not part of the club or whatever it may be, encourage, coach, and really deliver on on lifting up and growing people in your organization, not just because they're female, but I bet if you really think about it, there is a great female leader in an org that would be a potential candidate, and give them a shot and build them up, grow into them, right? And it's through that compilation and combination, that synergy of working together, that we do the big things. It's not going to happen by women saying, I belong here. No, 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 no. That's not going to do anything. But again, going back to disruption, right? And I've had to catch myself in my career, right, at times as a female leader. And I've had to say, okay, it's, because I had a leader one time tell me that I was assertive. And at the time I went home, I cried for 3 hours. I said, oh, that's so bad that I'm assertive. And now I look back and I'm like, I've been VP of a global company. Maybe being assertive is not a bad thing. Maybe I can use that in a diplomatic way, and also realize how to kind of transcend. At the end of the day, it's not personal. It really is just business.
Do you feel there's a little bit of a catch-22 in some ways, where it's obviously like very beneficial for a company to have all these ERGs and these communities and these groups, but there's also the opposite is true, where if you kind of label people, you also put yourself in kind of in a difficult position. So when you're in a position where you need to call things out, so like, hey, we need more women in leadership, it could also become detrimental to people who don't want to be put into a group. Like, where's the line?
Yeah, so I definitely think that, the idea of an ERG group needs to come from an employee. By that, I mean, it shouldn't be oh, hey, here's 6 different groups, go join one of them, right? Because then, like you said, there's this perception of all these different buckets. As employees go and they're passionate about building something, that could happen over time. But I think that giving them the freedom to be able to go and build it versus, it being an HR-led project, for example, is very, very, very beneficial. And then, just making sure that the message is organizationally wide, and that, especially if you're made up with a bunch of M&A activity, that there's not like 41, if you have 41 different legacy companies, that there's all these different, well, they're trying to do this or they're trying to do that. All that noise is not productive. It's a, hey, look, this is how, as an executive team, we're going to position this. We're an enterprise level organization. We want to position as an enterprise D&I, diversity and inclusion proponent. This is something that's going to help us to retain and to gain top talent. This is the way forward. This is the evolution. And it's hard. Change is hard. And I think I had someone tell me one time that no matter what you do, if you do something, there's going to be somebody with a target at your back if you do anything worthwhile. And the reality of it is it risky? Well, yeah, but not doing something is risky too. So you just kind of have to say, as a leader, I'm passionate about this, and pick that and be forward in it, and have a plan. And then have a contingency plan in your head. If this happens, well, I'm going to, this is how we're going to handle this, or this is how we're going to handle that. And then you're emotionally and logistically prepared to navigate.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And definitely a big gap, I think, in most companies to enable this kind of mindsets and opportunities. I'd like to change topic a little bit, Dannah, about so you're running your own podcast, and we spoke before pressing the record button about how powerful it is to then create a network and to speak to people and to just open up about issues we've just spoken about today. What drove you to initially to get that podcast started? And we also spoke about crossing the chasm in terms of the number of episodes you actually publish and keep on building. Like, where do you feel where it starts getting a little bit tougher, and then it's about powering through and then making sure that you go past that gap?
It actually started out of my insatiable need to be busy, right? I love to be not just busy, but productive. And when I got laid off, I needed to take time to feel. And after I took the time to feel and absorb and be a mom for a while, right? Be a partner for a while, um, I realized, hey, I need to do something different than customer success. I love customer success. It's what I know best.
Yeah.
But I need to take a brain break. And I did. And that's how the whole podcast started. That, and I knew some great people that I thought could bring some great insights into the SaaS community. I've had some people on from marketing, product, sales, success, but that's essentially what happened, and it was all about bringing that sort of voice right into the world of LinkedIn, and that's how it started. And I was certainly I was influenced by another friend that I had been on her podcast. I really liked what she was doing. And I said, hey, look, maybe at some point in the future I'll do this. Well, then fast forward 3 months later, I said, hey, look, I believe in positive rebellion, and I'm going to make a podcast about it. And so I did. When will that need be satiated? And when, I don't think, the thing about it is, A, I really like it. But B, I'm really excited about the conversation and where it's going and about the movement. So I don't see it as being one of these things that I'm going to be able to cut off, soon. I did make it over the, whatever that episode is that they say podcasts don't get over before they're like, oh, let me run away. I can't do this anymore. So yeah, but it's great, and we're gonna have some great content in 24. And so it's all good. But I am in some great conversations, and I finally have gotten to the place where I've decided, hey, I miss service and leadership, so I'm assured I'll be back in a full-time service role, leading a team soon again. But I'm going to keep on with the conversation of Rebels.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and you should, because I think there's a big market for it, and it's also an asset. I think it's a personal asset, and it's also a branding asset for anything you're gonna go into. In terms of interviewing, in terms of building credibility. Like, we have people who go on our podcast and then use the recording of the podcast as a weapon in their interview arsenal. And that's really valuable, because you give opportunity to people to actually showcase themselves in something that is not as scary as being on stage, but is still reaching a substantial amount of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's always a great idea to have conversations around things that matter with people that are asking questions that are important. And that's why I love what you guys are doing here, and everything. And I'm so very glad that we were able to make a connection and make this happen, right? Because I can't wait to see what's coming in 24 for this show.
Absolutely. We are just about out of time, but we do have a closing tradition. So we have one question. And that question is, throughout your whole career to date, and it's been an impressive one looking at your LinkedIn and getting to know you as well, what is your favorite memory and why?
My favorite memory and why.
The question that makes everyone look to the sky.
Oh, I know. It's like Dannah ponders. My the thing that I remember the most is when I was sitting at my desk, and I was actually nursing my child, ironically, and my second child, and I got the call that that they wanted me to come and serve as a VP for their org. And it was the first time in my career. And I remember asking myself, I've led big teams, but am I a VP, and why does it even matter to me? Because I had had leaders before that had asked, like, why do you want to be a VP? Like, it was something malicious that I wanted to go and be a leader. But I think it was in that moment. And I was actually doing that and listening to some music, and I ended up spilling coffee all over me. And it was just that moment of joy,
Wow.
and jubilation and that realness and the connection of my kid. Um, that's what it was, right? Because I said something before about business just being business, but it actually isn't. I think it's really about people. And that was just a real people moment for me. It was cool.
Amazing. Great answer. Well, awesome. Look, Dannah, it's been very, very great and insightful having you on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast sponsored by Jointflows. Until next time, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.